Welcome to Divergence at 60, or Neurodivergent at 60, I should say. Um, this video was inspired by an interview with Fern Brady, who wrote a book called, let me see here. Strong female character. Sorry about that. Um, so it's about females being female and autistic, and she's advocating for better understanding of autism and for women because it's still a problem even in 2023 getting diagnosed. So good on her. This is a great interview. Inspired me to make this video. So this first part will be a response to this video. I am not autistic. I do have certain mental health conditions that overlap with autism. Specifically, I have meltdowns and shutdowns. But otherwise, I am not autistic. But I am neurodivergent. And so um, uh, I want to first play her explanation as to why she got into business, or she wrote her book, and it matches why I'm creating this video, or I should say she inspired me to create this video, because there's not a lot of information about, uh, you know, having neurodivergent uh, conditions at my age, at 60. So let's play her first. So here's Fern Brady.
Yeah.
Stand out. It's just a nightmare.
Looking at this conversation that we've had and other aspects of your writing, all of it, I guess the name of the show is Unfiltered, right? But you're being incredibly frank and honest about your life and how you feel. And I just wondered whether you've ever had any hesitation to do that, to speak so publicly about your autism and your personal experiences, which, particularly in light, I guess, of what we were just saying, it's private, it's personal to you. You don't have to share it. And you are, was there ever
the main hesitation I had was I don't like when I really don't like when people decide to pick a cause and then they champion it. The reason I talk about my autism is not because I'm such a do-gooder and I'm a narcissist and I'm very self-involved. I did it because I was feeling bad about my diagnosis, and the thing that made me feel better was I saw someone who I thought was cool talking about their autism. So I thought, if she's made me feel better and then I do it, then that'll make the next person feel better, which sounds really cheesy, but so that's the only reason I did it. But I was worried about, whenever I speak about autism, I'm worried people are thinking, oh, has that just become her thing now? Like, I know people will say that, has that just become her thing? But then the positive of it is how many people seem to have felt better from reading the book. So it's hard to ignore that.
Great. So I'm doing this because I want you to feel better. Yeah. So the way I'm going to help you feel better is by telling my story and my experience about aging, being neurodivergent. And so there's not a lot out there. And so that's my, that's why I'm doing this. I want you to feel better if you have, if you're neurodivergent and, are going through an experience somewhat similar to mine. I do want to touch a little bit on hesitation, right? So anytime you come out, like I'm a out atheist as far as outspoken, you can risk, your job or family relationships or whatever, right? So hesitation is healthy. You should think about these things. But I'm not worried about it. I've been very outspoken about my neurodivergency in job interviews and at the workplace on an ongoing basis. If I just meet somebody, I'll just say to them, hey, uh, I'm neurodivergent. I don't use that words. I might now, but I just typically tell them that, uh, I have challenges when it comes to communication. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, just let me know, just something quick like that, So I've always found that to work, and it's never been a problem for me. I've never had a hesitation. Yeah. So again, this interview inspired me to make this, and I'm hoping to help people think about, aging with autism or any other neurodivergent limitation. Yeah. Okay. So the next clip, uh, we're going to hit a theme here that's just going to cover many clips, and these are out of order, by the way. That clip actually comes at the end of the interview. I'm going to link the interview below in the description. So these are not in order within the interview. They're just in order of the program here that I put together. Yeah. So the next one, she's going to hit upon a theme that's going to be in some of the other clips, which is spectrum versus buffet. She's going to just kind of drive right by the fact that she's got a best mate from college. A lot of us who are neurodivergent have a hard time forming relationships. I'm one of those. I don't have friends. It's not, not something I do. I'm relationship challenged in the stereotypical way, right? But the thing that is important with that is that neurodivergence is, I don't think, done well with the word spectrum. I don't. I wish the psychiatry people would quit using it. Right. I realize it's got a medical definition, but it's popular language. And when you think of spectrum, like when you put a beam of light through a prism, the colors you get are always the same. What you really, I think, would be better served by is buffet, right? It's a buffet, except you don't pick and choose. Something else, nature picked and choose what limitations you're going to get and challenges you're going to get from birth, right? It's not a spectrum in that sense, right? And it's not continuous. It could be spotty. You can have one some here, there, or whatever, mix and match. I'm sure there are some symptoms that are highly correlated, but I think it better served with a word like buffet. So let's hear her talk about her best mate. Yeah.
Normal girl does at school is you look left and right and look to see what the other girls are doing, and then you fall in line. But I think again, because of being autistic and just not looking at what other people at school were doing, that really helped me end up kind of pursuing my own path and doing stand up. Because there's still so few women do stand up in Scotland. Generally,
Okay, I got a clip ahead. uh, so we'll come back to what I just talked about. So this one is just that your life choices become informed by your neurodivergency, right? Your autism or whatever your profile is. And I want to focus on humor. I'm not a comedian, but if you know me at all, I'm always joking around, right? Uh, and I think that's because, there's this quote that I like. It goes, "Blessed are we who can laugh at ourselves, for we shall never cease to be amused." So when you're neurodivergent and you're surrounded by neurotypicals, right? The difference there is a huge source for comedy, right? If you take it the right way, if you're not, bullying or whatever. So laughing with instead of laughing at, right? And so, it's very easy to find comedy when there's that degree of weirdness. You know what I mean? So comedy comes very easy for me. And, it's more than just, neurotypical being in an environment with a neurodivergent. It's also that as a neurodivergent, I'm never surrounded by a bunch of neurodivergent people. So you do feel kind of like a fish out of water, right? So comedy. Anyway, so I'll talk about it a little later about how my uh, neurodivergence affected my career, although my main career is software engineering. It didn't inform that choice. It did inform some choices around it. Okay, so now she's going to talk about her best mate.
Oh yeah.
recently, and my best mate from Hope, who I've known since school, she messaged and she was like, "God, you were looked so glamorous on it," and she was like, "And I don't know why you had to look like that, and all the guys on it were just wearing like unironed shirts or
Yeah.
whatever."
As if they're just going down the pub to see a mate or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and I said, "Yeah, but the thing is no one made me do that. It's just that I learned early on. I only needed to be told once or twice and kind of look around me at the media landscape to think, okay, I need to play this game."
Mm.
Okay, so that was what I was thinking this previous clip was. But anyway, um, so she just kind of drives by the fact that she's had a best mate from college, right? Or high school or wherever. And I think that's great. And I think she's going to talk about she's got a neurotypical boyfriend. And I think it's really great that this stereotype that all neurodivergent people are relationship challenged. We're not, right? I happen to fit that stereotype, but she's not, right? And a lot of neuro atypicals or neurodivergents are not. So, you know, that's great. I really appreciated this part of the interview. Yeah. Okay. So, um, now she's going to talk about uh, going to Edinburgh, which is another thing I want to talk about. Um, just people think that because you're socially challenged, you're challenged everywhere, and that's just not the case. A lot of us are just fine uh, academic wise.
Talking about it, and you're describing things that you're saying, that was weird, or I was different, or it was odd. And why do you think at this time, maybe because hindsight is 2020, I don't know if that's the case, but why do you think the diagnosis that you now have about your autism, why do you think it wasn't available to you at that time? Why do you think it didn't happen? Because
people thought it was men that were autistic.
yeah, you said something about someone said to you about because you had a boyfriend, you couldn't possibly be autistic or something.
Yeah, and the worrying thing is, I thought that was over. Mental health professionals and doctors thinking that, and then I still have, because since the book's come out, I get no exaggeration, I get like maybe 10 or 20 messages a day about people's diagnoses or them trying to pursue diagnoses. And I've had so many women say, I was told I couldn't be autistic because I have a husband and kids. So it's still a thing that people think, because they think that we're, I don't know, if you function normally in any way, then you can't be autistic. A lot of people know what autism looks like. They just don't know that what they're looking at is autism. So say you're at a party or you're at a dinner party or something, and someone's partner just says things at odd intervals, or they speak loudly in a way that makes everyone uncomfortable. And then people kind of shift away from them and without really saying so, exclude them and stuff. You must have worked in some environment with that one person in the office that people think is weird. Often those people are autistic people, but people just don't know that's what it is. Because I see undiagnosed autistic people out and about all the time, and neurotypical people treat them so callously. Um, Especially when you think, a lot of us, if someone was struggling to speak English, we wouldn't treat them poorly. But if someone's speaking to be Oh my God, sorry. My brain's a mess today. I didn't sleep very well.
That's okay, don't worry.
If someone's not fluent in social skills, why do people feel like it's okay to treat them poorly? Not all neurotypical people do that, but I see it a lot. And it's bad when I see it in people who like to think of themselves as left-leaning liberals. I think, how can you um why do you take what this person is doing in such bad faith?
Mm,
It's quite painful to see.
you're not extending the kindness to someone of, you know, giving them the gift of better intentions or whatever like that. You're treating them as if you're sort of expecting the worst from someone without being kind to them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I understand what she's doing here. And again, I think this is a great interview. Wouldn't change anything. Not criticizing her as far as her interview here. She's advocating for autism and people with it, especially women. And that's a great thing. Um, However, my experience being a male with other, I don't want to say autistic, but, neurodivergent males is that communicating with them with their social dysfunction, a lot of it is anger and hatred, right? And you can kind of see that, and a lot of them, that anger and hatred comes out as misogyny or whatever against women. And there's this whole trope about, you know, these guys who, go to Comic Con, live in their mother's basement, never been on a date. It's a self perpetuating negative feedback loop. Their, you know, their social dysfunction is negative, right? Um, and I understand she's advocating for autistic people, but the thing is as a neurotypical, they're not sitting there thinking about diagnosis, right? They've run into what we'll proverbially called assholes, right? And then people make fun of assholes. I mean, we all make fun of Donald Trump. The guy's a dickhead, right? So, um, I think that's going to be the hard conversation to have in the future. Is that you know, social dysfunction isn't people just having a word choice problem, or you know, uh, making you slightly uncomfortable. A lot of it is anger and rage and hatred, right? That's their dysfunction. Yeah. Um, the other thing is, and she's going to allude to this earlier with um, a homeless guy and drug addiction, and we're going to come back to this. Is autism is and addiction are very commonly correlated, but more people have addiction than autism. It's not autism specifically, and that's very common. And it's really hard to separate that, to pull those out, right? And I think the mental health profile for people who have autism or Asperger's or whatever is their social dysfunction is, you know, for lack of a better word, they come off as an asshole because they're angry and derisive and, uh, you know, arrogant and all that, right? I mean, that's why it's called dysfunction. And so, I appreciate she's advocating for autistic people here, but in my experience, the reality is you're dealing with some very hard people to deal with, and you just can't kind of hand wave it away as saying, "Oh, you know, liberals aren't treating them right." Well, you know, liberals aren't treating Donald Trump right either. You know, I mean, the guy's an asshole, right? He's hurt real people. He's a sadist. The cruelty is a point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a conversation worth having, but I don't think we can just, you know, I don't know if Trump is autistic. I doubt it. I don't think so. But he's still neurodivergent, right? For sure, right? Um, anyway, so I keep getting these clips out of order, so I'm just going to play the next one.
Um, so I'd tried to get diagnosed when I was 16 because I'd been diagnosed with OCD, which didn't quite fit, and I was depressed and in a CAMS unit, like a teen mental health unit. And then after that, I was reading the DSM manual, and I said to my psychiatrist, I think I've got this thing called Asperger's. That's what they used to call it. And he said, no, you can't have it. It's mostly boys that have it. You're making eye contact with me. And you've had a boyfriend. I got told that again when I was 21 by another psychiatrist who I thought was a really good guy and really good at his job. And I put complete faith in doctors. Whereas I now know that lots of doctors and lots of psychiatrists know nothing about autism. They don't even get trained in how to recognize it. I had a GP tell me that autism is extreme maleness. That's in 2023. And that's long been debunked. Just because someone's not a stereotypical woman doesn't automatically make them male.
With this point about the boyfriends, could we just delve into it more deeply? Like, is the implication, is it a sexist implication that it's like, well, if you were an autistic woman, no one would go out with you, so how can that possibly be the case? Or is it that they've been
Yeah.
taught, or that they've been taught that basically autistic people will struggle to maintain romantic
That they
relationships?
don't have relationships. But
right.
actually, autistic. I mean, I'd love an autistic boyfriend. They're very loyal. And we would communicate in a similar way. But I mean, my boyfriend is great. The good thing about going out with a neurotypical is I tend to copy how he eats and his sleeping patterns and stuff, and that helped give more routine to my life. And he did say if I went out with another autistic person, everything would just be chaos.
Well, okay. So, uh, let's start with the last one there. Yeah. I do have, problems with the relationships based on my mental profile. Yeah. Um, that's okay. It is a struggle. I've tried. I've probably been in like a half a dozen relationships, nothing longer than a year, 2 years, depending on how you look at it. Right. It's so hard to figure out what people mean by relationship. Is it from the first time you sleep them, you first met them? What does it mean? Uh, so anyway, um, what I really like about this, I guess what I really want to say is he's busting all of the stereotypes, I think, for the public here about autism, right? She's got a boyfriend, right? And, the medical profession can't catch up. How can you expect the public to catch up, right? Especially when Hollywood is out there still cranking out stereotype representations of autism from the early 2000s, as far as I can tell, right? So, yeah, I think it's great though. I mean, if you're listening to this video and you're not autistic, the fact that she's you know, tearing down those walls, I'm really appreciative of. Even though I personally do have relationship issues, uh, lots of people who are neurodivergent don't. So, you know, there you go. All right, next clip.
I don't know.
When you're talking about chaos, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about it. One of the things you've written about a lot is kind of, well, trashing your flat. Smashing things up.
Yeah, that's the worst.
The meltdowns rather than shutdowns.
So I didn't want to write about that in the book because it is embarrassing. It's really horribly embarrassing. But the reason I wrote about it was because no one else was writing about it, and I wanted to. I always think that if you're a creative in any way, you should make the thing that you wished existed when you were younger. And I could not find anyone talking about it anywhere. And one of the most this is one of really the only negative things that's happened since the book came out. The Times serialized a bit of the book, which was amazing. There's an autistic woman that I follow on Twitter, and I saw her tweeting, "It's so annoying that certain famous autistic people are talking about smashing up their flats, and now everyone is going to think that's what all autistics do." And I realized she was on about me. because I follow her, and I was like, can you not subtweet me and just DM me?
Yeah.
The thing is, all autistic people were the same but different. Lots of autistic people have shutdowns, um, especially women, it seems. But the problem was I was only reading books about quiet, self-contained autistics. I couldn't find anything about meltdowns. And from the number of letters I've had since the book came out, from people being like, thank you so much for talking about this. I've never told a soul about this happening to me. That makes me feel like I made the right decision.
Just to be clear for listeners, could you explain the difference between the two, between a shutdown and a meltdown, what they both mean?
Oh yeah. So when you're autistic,
Okay, so before she gets to the explanation, right? I do want to say that meltdowns don't have to be trashing your room. For me specifically, it's crying. And I've read where that is a thing, a common thing among people who have meltdowns is they cry, right? And now crying, I'm not talking just, I'm talking hyperventilating. I'm talking, you know, 30 minutes and your chest hurts so bad you want to, you know, you're like, stop, and you can't. And, in the interest of the theme of the, aging as you get older, what happens with, you know, your symptoms, right? Your limitations that, and she talks about this a little bit coming up. My meltdowns once I left the house and I got out of the abusive environment, right, started to taper out, and then now I can avoid um, the meltdown environments, and I can just manage along with shutdowns. Yeah. So meltdowns don't just mean crashing your apartment. It can also mean crying, and I'm sure there are other modalities. Yeah.
decision.
Just to be clear for listeners, could you explain the difference between the two, between a shutdown and a meltdown, what they both mean?
Oh yeah. So when you're autistic, you can get overstimulated on a sensory level. So say I didn't have a good sleep last night. That's run down my batteries a little bit. Um, the lights in here, I mean, these lights are all right, but things like that kind of light that runs down your batteries a little bit more. Say I go on the tube after this and people are standing too close to me
Yep.
and touching me, that runs it down a little bit more. But you don't want to do anything that looks autistic because you've been taught your entire life that that's embarrassing and gross and weird. So you hold it all in, then you get home from a long day of work and you have a meltdown, which is like, it looks like anger from the outside, but it's really a big build up of sensory overstimulation and anxiety that you've had to push down. So meltdowns I've heard, are better for you than shutdowns. A shutdown's the same thing, but it's a lot more self-contained. You stop speaking, and I mean you stop speaking in a way that it becomes almost impossible to speak to other people, or actually impossible to speak to other people. And sometimes people just take to their bed because they just can't deal with any more sensory stimulation. So that's what they are.
Okay, so I have a couple points to address here. One is Jim's gray book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And the other one is emotional stimulation. So I actually haven't read a lot of books on autism. I don't know where over emotional stimulation fits in, but I want to talk about it. Let's talk about the first one, Jim Gray's book. Yeah. So in the 90s, all of my relationships have been with neurodivergent people, right? I've never dated anybody who is not. Um, and, the profiles were different, but, there is this kind of sense of common tribe. You're both struggling at some level. Well, anyway, in the 90s, my girlfriend at the time wanted us to read Gray's book. And I told her, I mean, back then we didn't say neurodivergent. We said dysfunctional. I said to her, I said, look, we both know we're dysfunctional here. I don't really think a book written for functional people is going to help. But she's like, no, I want to read it. Right. So I'm like, okay. And, she got on this man cave thing. She's like, you got to go in your man cave. Right. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I've been going into my man cave my whole life. This isn't anything distinct to this relationship at all, right? And second of all, this man cave thing doesn't fit the way he describes it, right? Um, like she said, right? When you shut down, you literally shut down, right? And that's not what a man cave is, right? A man cave is just a guy, kind of chilling, right? It's completely different, right? And I think this is a problem with a neurodivergent person or autistic person living in a neurotypical world. Is we still try to cling on to the neurotypical solutions. You know what I mean? We still try, and just neurodivergence at 60. What I can say is I went along with it. I did the best I could. Um, the relationship ended for reasons, right? But just be aware of that, right? I mean, don't get too uptight about it if your spouse wants to do something neurotypical. Yeah, I mean, just it doesn't hurt to try it, I guess, unless they're overstimulating you. So that's number one on that. The other one is emotional overstimulation. So now I was abused a lot as a child. I don't want to go into it in this video. This video is about, you know, what to expect when you hit age 60 with being neurodivergent. But I do get overstimulated emotionally, and I can have a emotional meltdown in the same way I can have a light meltdown. It's really frustrating. I don't know what to say, right? It's just, you know, these things, it's kind of like addiction is a bigger problem than autism. Much more people suffer from it. Emotional stimulation is also, I think, a much wider problem than autism. But if you have it and you also have light, sensory overstimulation, it's really frustrating because now you got two things you have to care about. It sucks. I just wanted to throw that out there that you maybe have to manage both. It's not just the sensory one. Uh, you know, um, Fortunately, the management program, which I'll get to at the end, is pretty much the same. So it doesn't require distinct stress relievers. Yeah. Okay, now we're on to the last clip.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as you get older, if you're still underdiagnosed, that creates more difficulties, right? Because if you're an older person in pain, you're going to end up being prescribed medication. You're going to end up being told all sorts of different things, and actually, it might be something completely. Well, it probably is actually something completely different, but you get misunderstood all the way through.
That's so interesting you say that because with regards to medication, lots of autistic people get plunked on antidepressants, or like you say, they'll end up with these physical health problems and get put on medication. And lots of us are really oversensitive to antidepressants, so you only need a half dose. For me, I don't take any antidepressants now, and that's not because I feel there's a stigma about taking them. It's not that at all. I should never have been put on them because they actually made me go mad. And that's the other thing is since learning how to manage my autism and learning how to manage burnout, I don't get depressed anymore. When I was depressed when I was younger, that was because my life was depressing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We talked a little bit at the beginning about self-medicating, right? with.
Yeah. Xanax, that was what I used to take.
Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, that was no one's really asked me about this as much. I did an interview for the American version of the book coming out, and they asked me about it because
Big
it's
in
so
American,
easy to get there.
big in American culture, same as Ritalin.
Yeah, but the thing that made me stop taking it was someone my friend's girlfriend was a psychiatrist, and she said, you know, that's going to cause lesions on your brain, and that like scared me into coming off it. But I was physically addicted to it. But the way I was taking it, and this was all very hush hush, only like my boyfriend knew about it, and he was the one that was like, you've got a real problem with this. Was because it would stop me from having a meltdown because it would knock me out. And I knew my meltdowns were a problem, but I didn't have a name for them. I just thought, am I angry, or maybe I'm just like a bad person. I must just be a bad bastard. Because I'd had meltdowns as a child, and my parents had said that I was just bad and I was evil because they're Catholics, so they're basically Amish. Um, so it'd always been characterized as this bad thing, and then for me, Xanax killed the bad thing. It made me docile and it knocked me out. And I thought my boyfriend would be happy with that because it would make me easier to live with. But he was like, "No, this isn't the way to fix it." And that actually brings me on to another thing. There's so many autistic people who end up having drink and drug problems. I'd say there's a higher than average number of homeless people who are autistic. In fact, when you talk about, I'm able to spot autistics out in the wild. I was watching a documentary about homelessness, and there was a guy in it who was a heroin addict. And just from 2 minutes of watching how he spoke and stuff, I said to my boyfriend, that guy's autistic. Then a minute later, the voiceover is like, so and so is autistic. Because if you are estranged from, if you're autistic, you're more likely to be estranged from your family. You're more likely to find it harder to cope with certain aspects of living independently. Not always, but sometimes. And you're more likely to try and cover up your autistic traits by developing a drink or alcohol problem. We also suffer from higher rates of unemployment. So yeah.
We were talking about weed, right? Smoking weed, and
Mm.
that, like, simultaneously, while someone might feel better for doing that, you were saying that also it can actually make your meltdowns worse. It's almost
Yeah, so I have to be really careful with weed because it pretty much always affects my sleep. And if I don't sleep well, then I would be more likely to have a meltdown. But it can also stop you from having one. But I have read that there's other autistic people find it useful. So yeah.
combined.
Okay. So drugs. Don't do drugs. That's true for neurotypical. uh, I like the fact that she's kind of sussing out, the fact that, for every person it's going to be different, and you should really be cautious about, even marijuana, right? Um, and it kind of does bring up that larger point. So there's kind of two larger points. Again, this is not a criticism of what she's doing here. She's advocating for autistic people, especially women, and that needs to be done. But the two larger points here is that autism doesn't live in a vacuum. There's probably close to 100% chance you're going to have other limitations like addiction. I have many, many limitations in addition to meltdowns, right? Um, we'll go into that, I guess, a little bit here. But, at some point, we need to start talking about mental health as a whole and a gestalt, and to say, well, people who have autism with addiction issues, uh, is that difference with autism and no addiction issues more significant than just autism itself? I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, these are just things to consider. We kind of think then that if you have autism, that's the biggest problem you have, but maybe addiction is. Um, and the fact that they could be amplifying each other. Um, so, those two things. Oh, the other one was uh, anger, right? She just kind of was saying that, autistic people um, get no understanding for the fact that they're not social, they don't follow social cues, but it's more than just, word choice or awkward, you know, nonverbal communication. A lot of people and who are autistic and who are autistic have anger and rage and hatred and end up being perceived as assholes because of it. And that's a mental health problem. That's a mental health issue. I'm not sure how we're going to address that. I don't think, with Donald Trump and where he is right now, the nation's ready to have that conversation, but we definitely need to have that someday. Yeah. Okay. So that's this response video. Again, I think Fern did a great job. Thanks. This is the inspiration here. So before I talk about my coping mechanisms, I do kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the other conditions that I have. Um, One of the ones I think is um, more interesting, I guess, is a lot of autistic people or some autistic people have cross wiring between sight and hearing and smell. They can smell colors or, see sound or whatever because the brain didn't get wired quite correctly um, during growth. For me, my uh, wiring difference, if you will, is I have a constant kind of film or movie screen in the back, film screen in the back of my mind. And kind of what's on it is just an array of colors. I remember when I was really young, maybe 10, I was a voracious reader. So books were gifts at Christmas. I got this book, and I don't think my mom understood what it was because it had this is common back in the 70s. It had a like John verse as the title of the book, but on the inside it was all about hippie stuff, right? What we call hippie stuff today or new age, right? So they were deliberately being subversive with it, right? But this was one of those crystals, biorhythms kind of books that, I got. And for the most part, I wasn't interested until I got to auras. And they were talking about an aura is this kind of spirit around you of many colors, and people could read auras. And that's kind of what it is. I kind of see all these colors, and whenever I'm around other people, they kind of gather around those people, and the different colors inform their moods, right? So I have that. Now, when I tell neurotypical people this, they kind of freak out. They're like, what? How is this not driving you crazy, right? But you got to understand, I was born this way, right? It's always been there. Why would it freak me out? It's the same as if you were to say, oh, to somebody who was, you know, a different species that had those arms, and then they saw you have arms and they go in front of your eyes and they would freak out because you would have your vision interrupted by your arms or something. You know what I mean? Um, so that's always been, something that has been with me. Um, the other one, which is really interesting, is the internal monologue. Now, there's some research going on into that today. Like, for example, I was reading a while back, like this summer sometime, that not everyone has one. I think something like 30% of the population doesn't have internal monologue, which I find kind of weird. Um, but same thing, right? I can create them, and this spell them at will, you know? It's kind of like one of the reasons I like software engineering. Look at this. This is really cool. So um, I can create thought trains, for lack of a better word. I have to use words here, obviously. But I can create these thought trains, right? Little bundles of tasks and send them off and run, right? And they go and they do things. And then when they come back, they'll talk to me, kind of like a AI chatbot or something, right? And um, I can create, I don't know, I've never counted. It's easily up to 10 of these things, just send them off, right? And they they'll communicate both with the movie screen in the back. I'll see, mostly colors get more solid when something's cooking, right? When something's ready. Um, you know, and then, I can just bring them up and you know, get different thoughts about things, right? It's I don't know how to explain it other than what I just said, right? But I feel bad for schizophrenic people who have no control over those voices, or people with dissociative personality disorder. Um, because I can just they're there, I can do away with them, whatever. Um, in fact, I don't know what I would do if I couldn't multi-train. It's a huge advantage when you're programming. I don't need a debugger. I don't need an IDE. I can just run the program in my brain. Yeah. Um, just send off different processes in my brain to represent the processes of the computer so I can model the CPU. Yeah. Um, of course, everything I'm saying here is a very gross, approximation. It doesn't really work this way, but I have to have words. And I don't know. I've never read anybody that was similar in experience. So, but that is part of my mental profile. And it also happens to be, to go back to the original thought I put out there about, most people have a 10-gallon capacity where I feel like I have a 500-gallon. Being able to think this way has been a huge benefit to my thinking, right? And on that note, IQ tests are garbage, you know? IQ tests are IQ and ego tests, right? This has always been my problem with doctors, right? Look, if a doctor has to ask me what's wrong, it's not science. It's not. I'm sorry, because humans are terrible at understanding their own health, right? So medicine will become truly a science when the patient says nothing, right? IQ tests don't measure IQ. They measure IQ plus ego, right? So if you're willing to put yourself into the test, that's your ego, and take it, and you have the capacity, then you can score well on an IQ test, right? I never score well on IQ tests because I don't want to. Screw you. you know, if you want to know how intelligent I am, you're going to have to be scientific about it, and you're just going to have to uh, measure me without asking me. You know what I mean? So IQ tests are bunk. They're garbage. Okay. Side note. We did a sidebar. Okay. So now let's just talk a little bit about coping mechanisms, right? So after all this, the number one and number two coping mechanisms with all stress for neurotypicals and neurodivergents alike is exercise and sleep, right? I mean, there's just no, uh, fortunately, like I was talking about earlier, if you have both emotional meltdowns and overstimulation, for me, light meltdowns, you have to manage both. And thankfully, exercise and sleep are the best ways I've found to manage both. Yeah. Um, the light thing for me was always kind of hidden because the emotional meltdowns were always far easier to diagnose, right, based on the emotional overstimulation, right? Um, so, but the management of overstimulation was always there. Once I figured out uh, around 2012 that I was dealing with both light overstimulation and emotional overstimulation, then certain things fell into place. For example, when I was a kid, when I went to sleep at night, I always slept under 3 blankets, 3, right? And now I realize that's because I was trying for complete darkness. Yeah, I needed to be in the dark. Yeah. Um, so, um, to all those people who don't want to wear a mask, I just like shake my head. My entire childhood was spent under 3 covers sleeping at night. So, do with that what you will. Yeah. um, so another one was um, over time, I, you know, at 6'2", it became harder and harder to sleep with the blankets over my head. So I took up the habit of sleeping with uh, a towel over my head, and eventually I got the t-shirts, right? And the reason for that is when I saw the neurologist, he told me that if you have uh, light stimulation problems, the diurnal cycle is very important. Go to sleep when the sun goes down and get up when the sun comes. No, I'm not going to do that because going to bed before midnight is not an option. So, but I do get up when the sun comes up. Now, I may not stay up for more than 10 minutes, but I do get up, right? And if you just wear a simple eye mask, uh, you're not going to see the light. So, how do you see the light if you want darkness and sleep? Well, I put a t shirt on my head. But over the years, I developed this process with 3. Okay, so here's my experience. If I only had one, I would literally have to wake up in the middle of the night to get up, reach behind me, and get the t-shirt that I was now sleeping on and put it back on, right? Because I would wake up, even just like a ambient LED light in a smoke detector or whatever will wake me up, right? But if I have a pile of 3 t-shirts next to me, what'll happen is eventually it'll fall off, and before I wake up in my sleep, I'll grab one and put it on my eyes. I've trained myself to do that, yeah. And so through the night, 3 seems to be the magic number, and then, it'll be off, and then, it's gradually getting lighter, and then I'll eventually wake up and I'll get up. If it's winter time, I usually don't stay up very long. I just go back to sleep and get up, later, uh, versus the summertime. So that's hint number one. That's another helpful hint as you get older. Uh, well, actually, you could probably use that one. I just threw it in there as a coping mechanism. um, Actually, I do have getting older uh, tidbits. 2 of them. One is drive-by symptoms. If you have some kind of neurodivergence, autism, whatever, you're probably already familiar with this, but it's worth putting out there. Um, I had an anxiety attack in the middle of the night one time. My blood pressure was over 200. I was in the emergency room. It was a cause for, going to the doctor and all kinds of stuff. And, did I have, panic attacks, whatever. That was it. It was one time. Went away. I don't know. I call them drive-by symptoms, right? Uh, this next one's not so much drive-by, but it's worth mentioning. I had IBS for 2 years. Now, it's very common for people who either have emotional overload or sensory overload to carry stress as body pain, right? And for me, I carried that body pain stress in my stomach, right? All throughout my childhood, right? So that lasted until I was almost 40, right? And then when I hit my mid 40s, all of a sudden I had IBS symptoms for 2 years. Went to the doctor. I described myself, and he's like, "No, you don't have IBS." And I said, "Well, what do I have?" He goes, "Well, you might want to see a psychiatrist because the brain gut nerve is this huge thing. It's unique and it's very complicated, and that can be, tied to night terrors and stuff." And I'm like, "Really? Oh, I didn't know that." So I didn't go see a psychiatrist because I'm like, you know, I don't think talking about it. And here's the one thing about me that, perhaps, Fern said she read the DSM, right? I can read anything. So I went and read up on IBS symptoms and non-IBS at the time, and it's usually just linked to something with sleep is the best I could find, right? Um, so um, I'm like, well, if it's sleep management, I'm already doing that. So I never did figure out what may have caused the IBS symptoms, but after 2 years, they just went away. So I call those drive-by symptoms. The other thing that, you know, just to be cognizant of is that when your body is aging, and this is not just with uh, neurological issues, but with any issue, they get exacerbated, you know, sometimes they can, right? So my mental health issues, some of them have not gotten worse and others have. And, if you're susceptible to depression, that could be a problem. I don't ever get depressed. I've never been depressed in my life. But if you get depressed, I'll share a story with you about how I changed my stimulation profile when I moved from Maine to, uh, California to Maine in 2018. I bought a house here. I couldn't afford one in California. So I bought one here. And I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying around when I was in the Bay Area. You know what I mean? But my body understood when I got to Maine, my brain said, "Hey, uh, you got less stress. That means we can shut down." And it shut down for almost 2 years. Now, the shutdown process took about 3 months. Um, and pretty much I was incapable of working. That was pretty much it, right? I tried working off and on short contracts. I was a contractor, and it just was not working out. So I think most of 2019, I just didn't work. And so, and this kind of goes with, you know, how to ride out the storm. That's kind of my uh, now neurodivergence at 60s is that, you know, even though when you're in the middle of the storm, it may seem like it's never going to end. It can end. I'm not saying it will end. I don't know that it will. It's like with my IBS symptoms when I was in my 40s. I had no idea what brought it on, and I don't know why it went away. Well, I think, maybe they would have called it a nervous breakdown or something a long time ago. But I think whatever it was triggered by the de-stressor of moving from California to Maine, and my brain just going, "Great, we're just going to shut down." So on that end, um, you can't sleep all day. You can't sleep 24 hours, although that's probably would be the preferred thing for your brain, I think. So what I would do is watch TV and play video games, right? Now, understand when I say watch TV, I'm talking in no lights, very low light, and the same with video games, right? I mean, there's no lights. The laptop is just sitting on 50% brightness, and I'm just trying to exercise my brain, right? So I'm trying to get back into work mode by moving off total zombie mode of watching TV and binge watching, every Star Trek there ever was, to, okay, now my brain is able to play video games, so I do that, right? And then I would try a little coding, right? So, um, now the obvious mechanism for you will be different, but for me, it helped, being able to say, okay, complete, rest, but I can't sleep 24 hours, to pretty much the next best, well, the next least effort thing, television, right? I did that for months, right? And then once I gradually started feeling better, I tried video games. And I think that's key, right? It's just keep trying to push your brain, like I would try to read books, right? It's amazing how you don't really think about how much brain you use when you read. And I've read a lot of books, but I get tired after reading like 3 pages of a book and I couldn't do it anymore. You know what I mean? And this is after sleeping 12 hours. So I'm like, oh, I'm not going to bed. So, just keep at it, Um, I hate when people say don't get depressed. You're not in control. I don't get depressed. I can say that because I never get depressed ever, right? If depression were inevitable based on the state of your life, I would have been depressed my whole life, right? Because, uh, these mental limitations and everything, right? Uh, so that's kind of my perspective on, you know, neurodivergence at 60, right? Now, many people who are autistic and neurodivergent have problems living independently. I'm not one of them. I can live independent. And so, one of the things that has helped me, in her description of a meltdown, she mentioned the fact that, being too close to people can run her battery down. Being around people runs my battery down, right? And so I've found that over the time, just living alone has helped greatly in both removing any kind of emotional overstimulation as well as um, uh, light stimulation, right? Because I can control 100% of the environment. All right. So the other thing I want to add in there is working remote. Now, funny enough, the pandemic kind of forced this on people. I've been working remote since 2010, right? And if you're neurodivergent, there's a couple of issues that working remote can help address. One is kind of the ADHD profile of being interruptive, right? So I don't have ADHD, just like I do not have autism, but I have some of the ADHD profile, right? And one of them is lack of control in being able to um, contain myself in a conversation. I will interrupt and speak for long times, and it's really kind of embarrassing and frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for the people in the meeting. When you work remote, just the act of having to hit the mute button to unmute yourself gives you pause to stop, right? And it sounds silly, but that really helps. I mean, it really helps me. I'll go reach for the mouse, and then I'm like, no, I can't do that, right? And so I've really cut down in meetings my interruption, right? So working remote for me has really helped manage that. And then the other one is just it helps you control both light and emotional stimulation, right? There's a lot of false research putting out there about how working uh, uh, on campus with other people increases productivity. That may be true for neurotypicals. That ain't true for neurodivergence. That is not true for me at all. If you put me in a group of people, that's a stressor, right? You put me in a group of people in a well lit room, forget it, right? Um, you know, a nightmare for me now, which I can never do. I can never go back to, is walking into an office building where you have like, say 4 rows of cube, and over each row of cubes is a row of lights, and they're continuous. It's these back to back fluorescent light fixtures, right, which are running the whole length of the floor, right? That is so bright. I mean, it's just incredibly bright. Uh, you know, you can do some things. You can have your clip-ons, or these are magnetic, right? But you can do these kind of things. But the problem with light stimulation is it's painless. I don't know what's happening when it's happening. So it's very easy for me to take off my sunglasses, right? Uh, because something is the color interference or something. I forget I just took them off, and now I just spent 2 hours overstimulated in light, and then I'll get home and I'll be freaking out. You know what I mean? So working remote allows you to control your environment, and it allows you, or allows me, I should say, my experience has been that um, you know the ADH symptom of being intrusive, right, and not being able to control interrupting conversations is greatly reduced. I think that's to the benefit of everybody. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know what you want to do. Hang on one second. That's right. You want to unplug. So I hope you found this video useful. My email is there in the screen. If you think that my particular array of neurodivergence aligns with yours and would like to, chit chat a little bit about it or whatever, feel free to shoot me an email. Yeah. And yeah, that's it. Take care. Ciao.